1 year. Things which were pending for a long time, which were important, have been addressed to. And I think so there are a lot of positives which will come out of this phase. And these initiatives of ours are definitely one of those positives which we proudly mention to all our partners, our old and new partners, and all our participants. This is the 6th OTP in the area of industrial safety, and this one is specific to oil, gas, and petroleum sector. We've already had over 1,600 professionals who have, unique IDs who have registered in last 5 OTPs, and we had almost 400 this time. So, which is an overwhelming sort of number from a from point of view that we initially thought 100, 150 is something what we thought we should ideally have, but having 400 and more, we had almost 600 registrations for this particular OTP. So I'm sure people come and go, and that's why at one point we had almost 450 delegates signed in, which I think is a brilliant number. And I always keep clicking pictures and sharing with Raghu Babu, to tell him that his what he guided us back then still continues, and with the same with the same steam. So I would like to also welcome Fatima Amin from NIDM. She's been great support and led the way from under the guidance of Dr. Gupta at NIDM. She's been very supportive in organizing this particular OTP. Harshit Sharma as well. And my colleagues are here. Akhil, who's not physically present here in Delhi, but he's outside. But then we have Manak Majumdar. Manak is a popular face in the area of industrial disaster risk management. He's become a synonym, in fact, of CIDM conferences. He can pick up his phone and dial any senior speaker in the country or even abroad, and they just don't have the courage to say no to him. So that's his aura. And Varun, of course, has been very instrumental. Very hardworking guy. Varun has been very important in putting this OTP together. So Manak, before I hand over to you, I would just like to formally welcome all the participants who joined us this afternoon for the third and final day of this OTP. We've had some brilliant, very intriguing, thought-provoking presentations in the past 2 days, and today is no less. We've got some very eminent speakers. Rishikesh, who's a technical advisor with GIZ, so he would bring up his experience of working in the industrial, from the sustainability point of view, from an environment perspective, and oil, gas, and petroleum, although is our focus, but then we would also want an overall industry's perspective, from a sustainability point of view. We have Dr. Ashish Mittal, who would be talking on occupational safety and health, and then of course Professor Jay Kumar, a very important key speaker, who would talk about psychosocial support in disaster management scenarios. There must be a lot of questions which people would like to ask, and we encourage them to mention those questions in the Q&A window. Please feel free to mention those questions in the Q&A window, which we would like to take up after the session, and also encourage our eminent lecturers and speakers to please take out time when you're not presenting to please answer those questions in that window, so that we can answer more and more questions. So on that note, good afternoon, Dr. Mittal. I finally see you now. Thank you so much for joining.
Good afternoon, Bob.
Thank you. Thank you for joining. Manak, I'll hand over to you now to begin today's proceedings formally with the presentation of Rishikesh. Over to you, Manak.
Thank you, Bob. Now let's start the presentation of Mr. R. Rishikesh Mahadev. Before his presentations, let me give a small brief about Mr. Mahadev. He's a technical advisor and sustainable urban and industrial in the organization GIZ. He's also a chartered geographer, GIS and engineer, environment with more than 15 years of experience in projects with specific focus situations, especially in environmental management, climate change using GIS and remote sensing tools. Its major areas of work are climate change adaptation, water and wastewater management, and planning of green, urban, and industrial areas, remote sensing, and GIS and its applications. His specialties include international cooperation, GIS, water distribution and management, green and climate resilient industrial parks and industries. Over to you, Mr. Mahadev, for your presentation.
Thank you so much, Manak, for this nice introduction. And good afternoon, everyone. And thank you, Rubab, Fiki, NIDM, NDMA, and CIDM for hosting me for last 5 to 6 years in your conferences. I would like to share my screen. So yeah, okay. Can you see my screen now?
Yeah, we can see your screen.
Yeah, okay. Thank you so much. So I would like to start this presentation with a topic on climate risk assessment of oil and gas industry. So I'll just cover the topics. It's not working. Hello, can you hear?
Yeah,
Yes, we can hear you. Yes, loud and clear.
Okay. So yeah, so the contents I will try to cover is what is extreme events or extreme climatic events in India. What is climate change adaptation? That's the area that we need to address on. How to do a climate risk assessment for your industry, and what are the key areas which are risk due to climate. We are talking in this only the climate component. Then what are the adaptation measures? So we all know the risks and problems. So what are the solutions? And couple of case studies from India. Yeah. So before I go, I would just try to make you understand what is weather, the difference between weather and climate change. So weather is something which is on a shorter duration time, which is days, months, what we experience on a yearly basis or 3 to 5 or 4 month basis. It's a gradual change. When this weather changes, when the variability of this weather changes over a period of time, say the average temperature of Delhi is 40 in April. So if that increases to 42, 43, and keeps on fluctuating over a couple of years, and then constantly it becomes average temperature becomes 42 or 43, then we call it as a climate change. So this climate variability, we are in the phase of climate variability where we are experiencing extreme weather events, and through the time or through decades it becomes a climate change. So what are the past observed changes in India? In last 100 years, we have increased our average temperature from 0.5 to 0.7 degrees Celsius, which is on a local basis, on its regional basis, it varies across the country. So in Visakhapatnam, say it has increased by 1 degree in last 100 years, or in Delhi, it has increased by 0.8 degrees, something. So the regional variability is of course occurring. The more serious issues we are facing are post-monsoon. That means the October to February seasons, the winter and post-monsoon seasons. These are experiencing high temperatures. The minimum temperatures are increasing on a daily basis. Then there are change in rainfall, annual rainfall. Some places it's decreasing, some places it's increasing. Then the heat wave was not considered as a disaster before 80s, but since 80s it has been considered as a major disaster, and the recent decades we are experiencing the number of heat waves are increasing, or hot days are increasing on a on a yearly basis. And also the sea level rise temperature and evapotranspiration, which is also decreasing and increasing in many parts of the country, which is affecting the ecosystem. Then what are the projected? So by 2100, the average temperature in India is to be raised by 3 to 4 degrees Celsius. See, this will lead to differential heating of surfaces, so that will further increases the heat wave. As the temperature changes, the entire the remaining other parameters, the climatic variables will also change, which includes rainfall, cyclone, wind, the humidity. So all these variabilities, the increasing in the variability will lead to more extreme weather events leading towards disasters. Then of course the rainfall is expected to increase in monsoon season, and remaining seasons it's going to get decreased. That will also affect the entire availability of water resource throughout the year. There are high chances of glacier melting. Initially it will lead to flooding, and then once the glaciers or snow is completely melt off, even the big rivers like Ganga and Yamuna will have much less flow. Then the mean sea level rise, the rise is expected to be almost half a meter by 2100. And of course, the sea surface temperature, which actually controls the entire global seasons, that's also expected to change. So this is the last 100 years of trend for the entire country, and this is from the source of IMD. So it's an analysis of 115 years of data. So this clearly indicates that since 80s, the rise in temperature has been high. And coming to these changes in temperature, changes in extreme weathers, occurrence of extreme weather events, India is already mapped or extremely prone to climatic disasters, which includes, if you see the top one, which is which indicates the drought prone areas. Majority of central India and some parts of northern India are drought prone. All the major rivers are flood prone areas, and in addition to the major rivers, now the urban lack of urban development, lack of urban spatial planning, land use planning, most of our cities are also getting affected by the extreme weather events. And this is a further, we have this flood map, the states which are getting affected, the northern states, and most of the states which are carrying the heavy rivers or big rivers. And this is the cyclone map of India, which is almost the east coast is completely affected, and in the west coast it's mostly the Gujarat state, but most of your refineries are also situated in the east coast as well. So they are all quite vulnerable to extreme cyclones. The intensity and frequency of cyclone has been increasing, and this may also have an impact on the industries and other economic activities. Coming to again, this is a wind map, but the heat wave map. Heat wave is something which is hot conditions in India, and any temperature above 45 is considered as or declared as heat wave, or above 40 for all coastal locations, and in hills it's around 30 degrees. So that's how it's a definition of heat wave, because heat wave is quite in recent decades only it has been defined, or it slowly people are getting to know about these kind of this disaster or hot conditions. Similarly, we have a cold wave also, which is especially in northern India, which is most vulnerable in the northern area, and it's mostly affected by the poor people and some of the processes which may get affected in the industrial sector. So, but otherwise, it affects the agriculture, settlements, and other parts of the other sectors. So, why we are considering these extreme climatic events? So it will have a direct impact on IPs or industrial areas and industries, and it may also have indirect effects. So the direct effect, it's damage to infrastructure, human workforce, production processes. It will have a direct impact. uh, and say heat wave or hot conditions. We have almost 3 months of hot conditions, hot summers in India. And if you consider any coastal cities like Chennai or Mumbai or Visakhapatnam, Calcutta, where there are a lot of industries, SMEs working there, just imagine the conditions of workers. The human workforce, they easily get affected, and their efficiency, their production efficiency, everything gets drastically gets affected. And the indirect effects, which means that it may impact the value chain of a company. Suppose you are getting if your industry is in Pune, and there is a Mumbai floods, and if your all the raw material and processed goods have to be traveled through Mumbai, then your company is indirectly getting affected due to Mumbai floods. So this happened in actually in Chennai floods. A lot of industries were shifted out, a lot of production units were transferred to other parts of the country, and a lot of shipping which used to come through Chennai to China to Chennai or East Asian economies was diverted or got delayed. So these are the indirect effects of the extreme climatic events. So once we go into so how does it impact the the industry sector? These are some newspaper clippings which clearly indicates that the industry sector is quite sensitive to extreme weather events. Say the Hudhud cyclone, it has completely affected the entire region actually. It has hit the Vizag city at 220 kilometers per hour speed, and it has seriously impacted the entire cities, entire districts. 3 districts were affected very severely. Similarly, the Chennai floods, and the monetary, in addition to this loss of jobs and productions and everything, the monetary losses are huge actually. The Vizag was around $7 billion, the loss was. Similarly, the Chennai was around 50,000 crores, something that was the estimated amount. So these have an impact, and definitely we cannot stop these extreme events. What we can do is we can just cope up with these extreme events. That means we try to plan in such a way that these extreme events have minimum damage to our surroundings, our industry, our cities, or whatever. So these extreme events are happening, and we need to cope up with these extreme events. That's where the solution lies, and that is called climate change adaptation. So in generally, you might have heard about mitigation and adaptation. So when you talk about mitigation, this is coming from the industries or from transport or from vehicles or industries, power sector to the atmosphere, which means that these are all related to greenhouse gas emissions. We try to reduce the greenhouse gas emission through energy efficiency planning, or improving the processes, improving the health of the people, improving the ventilation. We try to reduce the emission of greenhouse into the atmosphere. That's what we try to do it through mitigation process. In adaptation, what we do is we try to manage something which is unavoidable. That means if a cyclone comes, we cannot stop that cyclone. Where here what we can do is we can improve our key areas which is most sensitive to these cyclones. So that I will come in detail in couple of slides. But so it's more like an outside in. So adaptation is how the atmosphere is impacting the industry or the sector, anything like that. So what we do here, we try to assess the risk. define, measure, monitor, and evaluate the implementation. So, so, so some of the examples of climate change adaptation and mitigation are, uh, say, in the left side, it's adaptation, which is like increasing our capacity to adapt, or building resilience, improving the uh, industrial infrastructure, flood protection, raising the flood levels, water management, and green infrastructure, or clean energy. And on the mitigation side, it tries to reduce the causes of climate change. So it cut down the greenhouse gas emissions, which includes, say, sustainable transportation, renewable energy, improving the energy efficiency of industries, and etc. So there are some components like green infrastructure, which is plantation, which comes as both adaptation and mitigation. So that's why most of us suggest first thing is plantation. It can control the flood, it can control the greenhouse gases, it improves the beautification, it helps in shading, it can protect the cyclones in coastal areas. So it depends. So the green infrastructure is something which is very handy, and also the improving the energy and water conservation is some of the common things which are used in adaptation and mitigation. So how do you know what type of adaptation or measures that you need to do it? So that's where we call it of climate risk assessment. So here we try to understand the risk caused due to climate to the various components of your industry. Say, suppose, so before going further, I just try to address some of the key internationally recognized definition. So that we try to understand and how to do the climate risk assessment. So there are different components. One is climate hazard of the climate risk assessment. Climate hazard is something what we call it as climate related disasters, which are like cyclones, floods, drought, heat wave, even heavy rainfall, thunder and lightning, uh, even landslides, forest fires, all comes under climate hazards. And what is exposure? Exposure is something your industry, or a people livelihood, or any economic, social, or cultural assets which could be easily affected or adversely affected. Suppose your industry is placed in Chennai and one industry B is placed in Bangalore. So the industry which is placed in Chennai is more exposed to cyclone than the industry which is based in Bangalore. So the exposure of exposure of a unit to a particular climate is that is what exposure is all about. And vulnerability is whether the industry is uh, adversely affected, may get adversely affected or not. That talks about vulnerability. And the impact, say the industry may get an impact which can be positive or negative. Mostly it is negative, but the risk result from the interaction of climate related hazards, exposure, and vulnerability causes the impact. And adaptive capacity is something that the ability of a system or institution that could cope up with this, or cope up with or respond to these consequences. Suppose the industry which is situated in Chennai, which is a industry, has developed some flood or cyclone related protections, say high walls, or say mangrove trees, which can reduce the intensity of cyclone. If they have already placed it, then their adaptive capacity has increased. So these three, four definitions we need to understand before we go for a climate risk assessment study. And after this assessment, we come to some of the adaptation measures which can be implemented to reduce the impact of climate hazards on the industry. So in the oil and gas sector, if we identify some of the critical infrastructure, which is CI means critical infrastructure, the entire oil sector, then you have a bunch of things going on in the critical infrastructure, which is services, assets, certain interconnections, thresholds, and this all will lead to we are exposed and vulnerable to impacts. So we try to understand what type of impacts it may have, and then come up with an adaptation solution. So what are the critical infrastructures in, say, oil and gas industry? There are upstream area, which is mostly offshore oil platform or onshore pump jacks, midstream, which talks about transportation storage, and downstream, which is the refinery itself, storage, pipe, then distribution, transportation, then further they also support to other infrastructure like power, communication, water, energy, industry, uh, and also the retail and commercial customers and public services. So these are all the areas when you try to assess the risk uh, based on your position, where you stand, and try to understand the impact of climate on your industry or in your services or on your businesses. You need to understand, take into account all the components, the direct component and the indirect component. So what is the climate expert approach? So this is a generic approach which you can use it in across the industry, and it was developed by GIZ in Germany, and which covers identification of climate change phenomena and their impacts, assessing climate risk and opportunities. So there can be some kind of opportunities which can be also due to climate change. For example, in when we did I have done for many SMEs as well. So I'll also keep explaining some of the cases. So when we did an assessment in Vishakhapatnam for a small industry, which is a transformer unit, there was after the Hudhud, the cyclone, the demand for transformers has increased drastically because it was completely destroyed. So the demand for transformers has increased during that time. So that's kind of opportunity uh, can be considered as an opportunity. Similarly, the electric poles, 90% of electric poles were destroyed due to the cyclone. So again, the pole, the fabrication units and small SMEs who used to do the welding and making those fabrication units were benefited from the demand has increased. So that is the kind of opportunities. But then, yeah, so the damage was more than the opportunities. Yeah. Then the identifying and planning of adaptation measures and developing an adaptation strategy. So coming back to these questions, you have to do a kind of a semi-structured interviews or within your department or within your industry or businesses, uh, addressing 7 key areas. First one is the building and location. So where the questions you can ask yourself as whether the existing buildings or the infrastructure is enough to withstand these extreme weather events, based on your location also, because these climatic the say one refinery in Vishakhapatnam or the industry in Vishakhapatnam will have a different kind of climate risk vulnerability than the industry which is based in Mumbai. So that you need to consider the location, the local hazards which are more prone to that area. So considering all these aspects, you need to figure it out what type of risk which are prone to that your industries are more prone to what type of risk. So how sensitive is the company based on the location? Because in the same location, if your location is in the downstream or in the lower level, then you are more prone to floods than the industry which are just 5 or 10 industries apart from you. So based on the location also, then the existing infrastructure is how sensitive is to the climate change. how linked is the company to the neighboring company in terms of resource distribution, joint efforts, and how it's linked to the community. Regarding processes, how the processes are getting affected. So the energy supply is secure because the energy is coming from the outside. Whether your energy secure is supply is secured. Similarly, whether or you have a power backups, diesel generators, etc. Similarly, whether your water supply is secure, because during these extreme weather events or disasters, these are easily getting affected. And how the sensitive you're manufacturing to energy and water supply. Most of the oil gas sectors are both water and energy intensives, so that also you need to consider. How sensitive are manufacturing process to the extreme climatic events. So you need to jot down what type of extreme event your industry may face, and what are the how sensitive it to the manufacturing process. So it may be storage also. It can be also the high temperature may in fact impact the storage of your goods. The warehouses may get destroyed due to cyclone. Heavy rains can also impact your warehouses, etc. Similarly, the logistics and stock, the entire value chain, you need to assess how it may get affected. So the value chain from of the raw material as well as the finished products. So the entire value chain you need to understand how vulnerable or how sensitive it is to the climate change impacts. Then the working conditions. So especially working in peak summer in India, the coastal belts, because of high humidity also, the working conditions severely deteriorates. So we have done some studies in Chennai in SME sectors where heat wave was like, it's mostly the small scale uh, automobile industry, which are ancillary units to big automobile industries in Chennai. So these are all the workers were very sensitive or very prone to the extreme uh, temperatures, especially during summers. Their productivity drastically decreases. Similarly, we have done even in Vizag also certain industries which are also, there was a sand or sand industry or foundry unit which actually uses the dry sand to to mold their fabrication or foundries. So they actually due to the humidity, their sand used to get wet. So for that, to keep the sand dry, pure sand dry, they used to have a drying unit for just to dry the sand. So the depending on the location also, this it will certainly impact the cost. It will certainly impact the efforts to do the production process much smoother. So these extreme events you need to understand, and you need to understand how it impacts the workers within your company and also the community, nearby community as well. And regarding the government regulation, uh, in India for climate change adaptation, there is a very less regulation. Uh, Certainly, even in EIA process, it has been touched mildly. Yeah. So, but then there are certain cases where government also gives some money or ask insurance company to take up much faster or uh, respond to fast. I mean, respond to the industries during extreme climatic events much faster. So these are some of the responses from the government. How the market behaves. So the market for large scale industries are definitely depends on the stock market, but for a smaller industries is the local market, the value chain, and the demand for certain goods, certain products, that how it impacts your industry. And definitely the financing component during these extreme climatic events, how how it impacts your finance, how the lending from the banks are available, or any venture capitals are available, and also these things needs to be analyzed for the as a part of climate risk assessment. So, so actually, this is a climate expert tool. This is available online also. It's an Excel-based tool. You can download it, and also you can assess your own company to these questions and try to understand how risk or how much risk your company poses on all these aspects. So when it comes to the future climatic events, I have already explained. The cyclone prone areas are high. So these are some of the uh, areas of ONGC assets, Oil India assets, and refineries across the country, and how it is located across the, how much sensitive they are to the extreme climatic events. When you look at on the eastern coast, you can easily see that the sites in eastern coast or the sites in Gujarat are quite vulnerable to cyclones, and it is expected that 78% of cyclones, 485 in total, it actually falls directly in Visakhapatnam, Kalingapatnam, Gopalpur, Paradeep areas. So this entire stretch, and another stretch is from Nellore to Chennai. So these two stretches in East Coast are very vulnerable to climate cyclonic impacts, and yeah, so the risk to West Coast of India are likely to also increase. So we had it in, I think, in 2019 or 18, and we had the Kerala and southern Tamil Nadu uh, cyclonic event as well. So the flood risk of India and how the industries or the refineries are located. So some of the refineries like Koyali, the northern India, uh, the Mathura, Panipat, Bathinda, they're all in a high flood prone zones. Even the central India, uh, even the Vizag, Tatipaka, Manali, this Nagapatnam, these are all cyclone prone as well. And regarding the pipelines, this is something like which is coming out from IOCL and GAIL pipeline. These are the northwest part of India are quite sensitive area and sensitive zones for these pipelines for regarding the flood prone areas. So these pipelines are quite sensitive to floods, and they are in high risk areas. Similarly, the soil moisture, the drought conditions. So the pipelines which are mainly the IOCL is in highly drought prone or high dry areas which runs through, and yeah, so remaining are on a low to medium risk zones. So the oil, so any industry or any sector is not independent by itself. So there are a lot of interdependence of oil infrastructure on other sectors as well. So when it comes to the electricity, it's medium risk. Vulnerability is on the medium scale because electrical power for use to production plant and machinery to the oil infrastructure. Then also electrical power industry requires fuel for generation purposes and maintenances. Similarly, for natural gas, the fuel for gas compressors, which comes from natural gas, it's coming from natural gas sector to the oil infrastructure, and again relevant raw materials and lubricants to the natural gas. Transportation, fuel for transportation purposes, it's quite high, which is considered as very high, and yeah, oil transportation to refineries and distribution is on the medium risk. Similarly, the telecommunication and IT sector, IoT based nowadays, so it's all monitoring, control, communication. These are all on a high risk area. And fuel for heating or transportation purposes, the vehicle are on a low risk area. The water is again medium risk, and fuel for heating the water, transportation vehicles, etc. Low risk. Overall, the industrial and health sector, it's on a lower side, but yeah. Uh, so oil and gas sector does not work independently. So you need to understand the entire value chain of your industry, both the raw material and the finished products, and how it is connected to and where it is coming. What are the extreme events happening at the source, also during the journey or during that route of the raw material value chain, and also the finished product, where it is going, and also the travel or transportation, how sensitive those areas are. So overall thing, like the temperature aspect, if there is an increase in temperature, it will primarily affect the transportation, electricity and transportation sectors. It will have an impact on oil supporting transportation infrastructure, fuel supply delays, increased cooling or load needs, increased maintenance and transportation. Similarly, for high winds, hurricanes, high precipitation or rainfall, humidity, etc., it will affect the electricity and ICT sector. So it may also have an impact on transmission lines. As just said, that the entire Vizag during the cyclone, 90% of poles, electric lines were damaged due to cyclone in Vishakhapatnam in 2014. So similar, the entire transmission distribution lines may get affected. The lightning strikes may also impact. Smoke and ash deposition can enhance the air. So these are some of the impacts that can happen due to high winds or cyclones or high rainfall. Similarly, high temperatures can also impact the cooling water quality, quantity, above ground infrastructures. A drought, extreme precipitation can lead to landslides and erosion scoring. Then again, high temperature impact on industry sector, delay in interruption of raw materials may occur. Uh, High temperature impact on transportation sector. Second, then all the processes may get also impacted, which means that on a high extreme hot conditions might change the means of transport. Interruption, delay, disruptions. Extreme winds can destroy the trees and further damage the other uh, infrastructure. The road get damaged. The oil transportation may get affected. Landslides can actually cut off the transportation as networks at all. So the recent landslide in Uttarakhand also has actually cut off the entire transportation network. So also the temperature at the oil extraction, refining, and transportation, the damages to transportation infrastructure, fuel supply delays, maintenance of oil transportation and subsectors. Then also it will also impact the fuel supply delays, interruption delays, etc. So these are some of the climate parameters and how it may impact the oil and gas sector through the value chain. So this is what it talks about the uh, climate impacts or hazards on the different sectors. So coming to what are the measures, what is the solution that you can actually apply, and that is known as adaptation measures. So that when it comes to the adaptation measures, we have categorized into based on the hazard. So when it comes to say cyclone and cloud burst, which is mostly in the coastal areas, so some of the measures that you can implement uh, are like high wind resistant foundation, orientation and shape of building, anchoring of roofs. After the Vizag cyclone, majority of um, industry roof were blown away, and actually they came up, and they have set up high wind resistant foundations, high wind resistant sheds. They have strengthened the roof actually, and also the cost of truss has increased by 25%, because of the increase in the strength and increase in the material cost and all. So the planning of based on the location, based on the impact, climate hazard, you need to come up with a solution. Similarly, lightning is quite common in India across the country, especially immediately after summer or during summer. Summer we have this heavy rainfall, sudden rainfall, and also the during the monsoon seasons. So mainly the lightning protection system should be set up. Majority of big large industry have, but majority of SME sectors, although as a mandatory they should have, but they lack these things. Coming to heavy rains, definitely you need to come up with a landscape feature to control erosions, erosion-proof structural system. Some of the things which are underground that needs to be protected through floods. Some of the things which are stored underground to maintain temperature. Some chemicals, especially in pharma and bulk drug industries, they store chemicals below the ground, or partially, most of, I mean, 80 to 90% below the ground, so that it does not interact with the atmospheric temperature. So those things needs to be protected. Raising of flood is quite raising of a foundation or plinth level is one of the most common features. Then improved drainage system. As you all know, like most of the cities gets drained or gets flooded in our country during monsoons nowadays. So that's a major improvement has to be done in the stormwater sector, stormwater drainage. Also protection and maintenance of roads, then flood proofing doors, windows, erosion proofing roads. It actually, you as an individual, as a expert, you're all expert in your field, so you know your industry much better than an outsider who does the climate risk. So it's better you do yourself and try to understand which are the most vulnerable areas of your industries. So coming to heat wave and droughts, heat wave has become very common across the country nowadays. So even nowadays, the sheds with simple painting, the reflective paints are coming, which actually reduces the temperature inside industry temperature by 3 to 4 degrees Celsius. And simple measures, it's not very costly measures. So light colored and reflective paving materials, compact buildings, tree and vegetation shadings, green ventilation corridors. Even if you plan the industrial areas, it should be planned according to the wind direction and the slope, but it's not generally done in most of the cases. But yeah, it has to be done so that during the summer season, the wind passes through these and through these green corridors and actually reduces the temperature, and it will have a better impact. And cooling of buildings, so building insulation has come up, and cross ventilation. Majority of SME sector actually, if you see the cross ventilation, or simple uh, hygienic conditions are not maintained. That the simple cross ventilation and a hygienic condition can drastically improve their working capability, or uh, working efficiency of the labor. And also the labor management, especially during heat wave conditions. Many of the engineering sectors, some of them have actually practiced, say, to work from 7 to 11 to 3 o'clock they are giving rest, and then 3 to 7 or 8 they are working. So many of the SMEs are also following this system. And high performance glass nowadays, initially we try to copy the European or American style of the glasses in software or IT sector or many office buildings. But then it starts slowly we all realize that it started absorbing the heat and now actually they are painting it with a heat resistant paints and other things. So this is something which we need to use. We cannot just copy and paste from some other country or some other location to our system. So it has to be customized to our where which part of the country we are. Based on those concepts, we have to plan our industry and try to reduce the impact of these extreme events on our productivity as well as our industries. And again, water is another major component, which you all know. So rainwater harvesting or energy efficient or water efficient fittings has to be improved. Then the electricity mix diversification. We cannot completely replace our electricity with solar or wind energy, but yeah, substantial component part, at least 30 to 40% we can replace with cleaner production or a renewable energy, say, using renewable energy. And certain small things energy efficiency is one thing that you can actually improve your industrial processes. Small measures like protecting your HVAC with better condition, or the air condition which is outside your home, that requires a small shading can actually improve the performance of your air condition. So we also came up because we worked mostly in Telangana and Andhra Pradesh. So we also came up with a plantation guidelines for Telangana in industries and industrial areas. So we came up with also pollution component, resistant component with scientific and local names. Also where it has to be placed. So median along the roads we have proposed certain kind of plants, both sides of industries, what type of plantation has to be done, the block plantation, what type of plantation has to be used, and something like that. Similarly for Andhra also, we came up with a solution, say cyclone resistant, noise abating, dust resistant, air pollution reduction, or heat stress. So we also try to propose certain what are the revenue generation plans in common areas, or aesthetics improvement and something like that. So also I just try to give couple of case studies from Vizag. So Vizag is affected by cyclone, heat wave, high winds and heavy rainfall. So considering this in our mind, we need to come up with some kind of solution. So for a cyclone, we try to understand what are the past hazards. So the biggest damage to individual industry has happened in 2014. It has damaged the roof to varying degree and destroyed many. And so in terms of risk or vulnerability, the workforce is extremely vulnerable or very high vulnerability. Production is highly vulnerable, and building and structures are very vulnerable. Regarding heat waves, the production and workforce is vulnerable, and medium vulnerable are buildings and medium to low are building and structures. Similarly, localized flooding. Actually, that area is a flat area and with a good infrastructure, drainage infrastructure. So we propose like it's a low vulnerable to localized flooding, and also the low vulnerable to water scarcity, uh, to medium vulnerable for workforce. So this is how one has to go for a climate risk, and certainly you can have a more improved versions. So we have visited some companies and proposed certain solutions like cooling the company, because that area is very these 3-4 months are high temperature plus humidity. So if the temperature is 40 and with a high humidity, you will feel like 44-45 degrees Celsius. So that actually reduces the productivity of workers and the industry as well. So most of the industries are GI, having GI sheds, or the common sheds or asbestos, which actually both absorbs a lot of heat inside. And many industries have small furnaces or heating systems which actually we use for productions, ovens and etc. So we propose to reflective paints, simple paints. It's not very costly. Um, with less than 30-40,000, the entire industry sheds can, these are all MSME sector, so entire industry shed can be paint and use the reflective paints, reduce the temperature within the industry by 3 to 4 degrees Celsius. So we also propose anchoring of roof structures, which can have which can for the cyclones, which is quite low, and it will have a reduced impact due to cyclones. We also proposed, the light colored roofing, which just explained, for heat wave areas, heat resistant structures, which will have low to medium cost. So these are the two cases, maybe. But in the same location. But if you see the risk, there are slightly different solutions. So one case which has strengthening of roof, because cyclone is a regional impact. So we have proposed both the industry strengthening of roof structures, improved cross ventilation. This is one industry which is mainly engineering. Second is the food processing industry. So we need to remove because it's a humid area. So we propose dehumidification system, and because of humidity, there may that the food, being a food processing industry, it will also generate the worms, or the insects, and it will attract those insects and in the storage, and it will completely destroy their finished product. So we propose the dehumidification system, roof insulation, insurance. Majority of SMEs are not taking insurance. They are actually suffered a lot due to cyclone, and after the cyclone, the premium got increased. And also the remaining the based industry specific solutions we have provided. So it's mostly, what I want to say is, it's based on your industry, based on your location, based on your processes. You need to do your own industry assessment. It's a very simple, it's not a rocket science. It requires some, with the kind of experts you have, I think most of you can easily do it. And yeah, finally, the conclusion, what you need to understand is, you need to identify the climate hazards in your area, identify key areas within your processes, within your industry, which are very vulnerable, which can be categorized into building and infrastructure, processes, supply, value chain, logistics, employees, support from the government and banks, markets, how market react due to the uh, localized flooding, financing, and strategize your adaptation plan. So we have already uploaded all the guideline manuals, plantation guidelines in the website. Being GIZ being a public domain, a lot of information is already there. So that's it. Thank you so much. Did I go very fast? I hope.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mahadev. It was really a very wonderful, presentation from your side on management. And you also showed a lot, through case studies about the different aspects how climate change has an effect on the industries, especially on the eastern coast, regarding cyclones. You spoke about extreme events in India, climate change adaptation, climate risk assessment. You also spoke about climate change and climate variability, and also showed that, over a period of around 100 years, how the temperature, there's a probability of chances of increasing the temperature from 3 to 4 degrees centigrade. Well, that's quite interesting that we have also had an e-conclave on fostering cyclone resilience in industries, infrastructure, and communities a few days back. So obviously, they're also the same thing that, that the eastern coast is much more vulnerable to cyclones, and as you mentioned that it's about 76% of the cyclones affects in the eastern coast. So really it was wonderful, and I would only request that there are certain questions and answers which are in the chat box. If it is possible for you to kindly reply to them in the chat box itself, then that would be great. So let's now invite
Sure.
Dr. Yeah, thank you so much. Let me now invite Dr. Ashish Mittal, CEO, Occupational Health and Safety Management Consultancy Service, presentation. And let me give a brief about Dr. Mittal. Dr. Mittal is a medical law and management graduate and has been working as occupational health consultant for last 25 years. He is CQI and IRCA certified ISO 5001 and 2018 lead auditor on occupational health and safety management systems. He has enriched work experience of medical management trainings, advocacy, audits, and consultancy with corporates, MSMEs, government agencies, civil society organizations, international forums, individual artisans, and various unorganized sectors. He is a founding member of Occupational Health and Safety Management Consultancy Services, OHS-MCS, International Conference on Occupational and Environment Health, Association of Occupational and Environment Health, In the Service of Mankind, ITSOM, Labor Resource Center, India Ban Asbestos Network. He has been a member of teams designing, advocating, implementing rehabilitation of workers suffering from occupational diseases like silicosis, sewage workers at various national consultation, local governments, ministries, national human rights commissions, high courts, and the list goes on. So over to you, Dr. Mittal, for your presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Manek. I'm audible? Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for the introduction, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to be with you again. I think I'm now present in most of your OTPs. So that is, much pleasure for me. So basically, for today's talk, what is occupational health? I'll start with what we understand by occupational health and how it is like in oil and gas sector. And I'd like to thank you, Mr. Rishikesh, because my task has been made much easy by his presentation, because whatever he has talked about, like even say reflective paints in the small industries, which we want them to adopt, because that will help us mitigating the effects of exposures on the health. So even very small adaptive changes which are there, which can be implemented by most of the industrial units, will help us with the what we are going to hear in next around 30-40 minutes. So thank you very much. Let's see, I'll make it full screen. So I would start with presenting this photograph to you. This is very crucial to understand occupational health in its, the true aspect, because otherwise we know the term occupational health. If we convert it into Hindi, it is Vyavsayic Swasthya. So occupational health means the health related to our occupation, where we spend most of our time, and how it is affecting our health, or how it is going to be in coming years once we are adopting to a one occupation. So if you see this photograph, just imagine like making a shirt in US and in Bangladesh. So in US, the shirt cost around $13, and in Bangladesh, it's around $4. Difference of almost $9 in one shirt. If you compare the cost for the materials, or the other things, so it comes to be not very like huge difference, but the main difference, if you see, is between the labor cost, where in US it is almost $7.5, and in Bangladesh it is $0.2, right? So why this is, I mean, is this they are paid so high in the US or they are paid so low in the Bangladesh? I think this is point to ponder over. The thing is basically this, most of the labor cost goes into health and safety basically. It's not that they might be paid well, they might be getting $2 instead of $0.2 in Bangladesh, but the difference of $5 may be going into their health and safety. So that is the difference between we as a developing countries and the developed countries, where most of the manufacturing has been shifted to us as a developing countries, because the cost variability is so high that over there, maybe we can call it litigation cost. I mean, first it is preventive cost, and then could be a litigation cost later on. So which prevents them to do all the hazardous jobs which have been shifted to most of the developing countries, right? So, and the result is basically which we can anticipate. It's a factory collapse in Dhaka, Bangladesh on May 9, 2013, where more than 1,200 people died in one collapse of the building, right? This was a government unit, and they started work in the morning. We have heard about buildings collapsing in Mumbai in much of the rainy seasons every year, but this is a huge cost to an industry where 1,200 people in one go died because of an accident, right? So here, if that building was not occupiable and still that factory was operating over there, and there was no alternative to look for the health and safety of these employees or the overall then we can think of, we have seen in last 1 year so many accidents happening in India itself, starting from uh, May 7, I think, in Vishakhapatnam with styrene gas leak, and then continuously we are hearing some blast happening, some fire happening in much of the places. So those are the factors contributing to the much of the accidents or injuries to our employees. Uh, so, but looking into, I mean, theoretical definitions of occupational health, as we know that health by WHO, World Health Organization, it says that it is not merely the absence of disease, but it's a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being. So it's a state of your body, your mind, and your I mean surroundings where you are living. So if you are in harmony of that, then you are in good health. And so basically, the factors which are affecting our health is they are either internal or maybe external. Most of them are external because the environment which we are living is affecting our health. And so basically, if we want to know about the health or the disease part, we have to have the close association or interaction of these human bodies to their environment, which will reflect that how it is behaving. So, and if we look at our own body, say for example, we are all here, and we may feel cold in the same environment. Somebody may feel suffocated in the same environment. Somebody may feel like uneasiness or all those things which we can feel, because this is a unique machine, and individual machines are very unique, and they react to external and internal environments very uniquely, right? So, and basically, the environment is internal environment where harmonious functioning of each and every component of tissue organ system of the body is happening. We have eaten, we have we are listening now, we are watching now. So everything is being is assembled by the body without any on-off switch, right? So this is how the body is functioning, and it is reacting to the external environments. Environments are home environment where we spend like maybe 16 hours or 14 hours depending on our jobs. So that is how we live in our uh, own places, like um, how we eat, how we sleep, how we what we eat, all those things which can impact our body. Do we exercise or not? All kind of thing. So these things are affecting our body. And the other environment is workplace environment where we spend maybe 8 hours, 10 hours, 12 hours. So depending upon that. So if we start working around the age of 23, 24, 25, whatever we look at, and we work till 60 years of age, so almost maybe 35 to 40 years of our total existence, we spend 8 hours per day on workplace, which cumulatively means around 15 to 20 years at one environment, which is our bodies are exposed to. And then is the community or socio-economic environment, which again affect our existence, where we live, how is the climate, which has been already tackled very well by Mr. Rishikesh. So these are the factors which affect the human body. So for example, if we want to know about any of the disease, if you know that infective disease, now we talk about COVID or coronavirus, right? We all know that how it is spreading, even at workplaces, how we have to control it, how we have to take care of it. So all those things are now in our frame of mind. So if it is a occupational disease, for example, coronavirus itself, at some workplaces could be occupational disease because of the close proximity of workers spending much time to each other, and then if somebody is already having infection, then he can spread it to other workers. So that is the thing which we know about how environment interacts with the human body. Again, one more example to understand much thoroughly about this is, for example, dengue disease. So in particular time of in northern India, if it is happening in September, October, where the mosquito breeding at that time is very congenial to the mosquito, that environment and that thing. And we all know that how to prevent dengue from to affecting human body. We know that how to prevent mosquito breeding, how to, if mosquito breeding is still there, then how to protect ourselves. Like we have to have doors, we have to remain inside in the evenings when the mosquito bites. We have to have full sleeves clothes, minimum exposure to the outside, or maybe we have to use mosquito nets, or maybe we have to use mosquito repellents. uh, the first is to prevent the breeding of mosquitoes. So we all know that this has to be done. So take it to the your workplace environment. So there is exposure, there is a congenial environment, and then it can cause any disease to human body. So that is human occupational health. This is very recent because as you see that in India, occupational health, although name is there, but we are very few occupational health physician in India. And there is not much I can say which has happened in India as of now. But if you think that this is a very new branch of medicine, then look at this slide where we say that uh, occupational health has been like as early as 4th century BC, where Hippocrates noted lead toxicity in mining people, right? Those people who were mining, and then he collaborate the data and then looked at how they are presenting. So lead toxicity means it is neurological deficits in many of the people working in those mining areas. So I'll let you know how this is presenting. So then in 1st century AD, Roman scholar Pliny and Elder, they associated the risk of working with zinc and sulfur and devised a face mask made of animal bladder. animal urinary bladder, they designed a face masks to protect these workers from exposure to zinc and sulfur. So the personal protective equipments, which are now much famous with even household name now, so they were designed in first century AD by some of the like innovative doctors who thought that we have to design something to prevent the exposure to these workers. And then in 1556, the German scholar Agricola, in his book De Re Metallica, described the diseases of miners and prescribed preventive measures. So all those things which we heard in last lecture have been like in design principally since more than 300 years, right? Or rather 400 years kind of thing. In 1700, Bernardo Ramazzini, known as the father of industrial medicine, published the first comprehensive book De Re Metallica Artefactum Diatraba, The Disease of Workmen. He asserted that occupational diseases should be studied in the workplace rather than in hospital wards. So this is a beautiful quote because sitting at your chamber as a doctor's chamber, you won't be able to correlate the disease and what is the exposure in the environment. So if you know workplace, you have been to that workplace, then you can think of associating this presentation of symptoms by any individual that, okay, this could be the possibility. For example, I can just give you a small example of this. So one almost 50 years old male came to me with a number of joint pains. So he was eager to get it diagnosed as arthritis could be possibly, and he wanted me to do all the, blood examinations, CT scans, and all those things. I just asked him to relax and took the detailed history, and in the end, we land up with like looking up that he was driving a lot uh, for his work. He has driven almost 10,000 kilometers in the last around 6 months, and once we came to like particular joints, it was his elbow, left elbow, and right ankle, and the left wrist. These are the main joints which were paining continuously. So in the end, we came to conclusion that this was because of his driving, and then he need to hire a driver which can release his burden on his these joints, and then like could be. So if sitting at your place, could one possibility is that you can diagnose, but at workplace there are so many exposures that you have to be in the workplace and then try to correlate these things. So there were much happening around those areas, and in 1788 chimney sweepers act came because people who used to sweep the chimney, I mean they were sweepers, and they in steel industry, they have to go and clean those chimneys, big chimneys, and there was carbon soot in that chimneys, and they used to get the urinary bladder cancer. So to help these people or the workers, the Chimney Sweepers Act came in 1788. Then came the Britain came up with the Factories Act in 1833, and that was a preventive legislation to protect the workers and the environment from the exposure in these industries. You can imagine at those times the exposure was much high and it was easy to diagnose. Like if you are working with some particular chemical or some metal or something is, so it was exposure was high because there was no preventive mechanisms. uh, Even simple cross ventilation or those things were not very known that if we do this we can prevent the exposures, or in the mines no PPEs or no other things were there. So it was very quick to recognize that okay, this is the illness, and if group of people was presenting with the same symptoms, so you can think of that this is a kind of exposure from their workplace. But then it was like preventive aspects came in 1833, and simultaneously in US, compensation law came in 1911. So that was basically to uh, like if you injure somebody or you in the due course of their employment, if they get injury or disease, they should be compensated for their illness, right? So that is how it was happening in all these years. But in India, we are still long way to go. In India, we do have many of the acts or things in place. So initially, Workmen Compensation Act came in 1923. So it was like in the beginning we thought of that okay, uh, during the course of your employment, if I hurt you or if you are injured or you are like ultimately death happens, so I'll compensate you because of what has happened to you, right? So it was more of philanthropy kind of thing that okay, if I harm you, I will compensate you. Then came the Factories Act in 1948, which was more of preventive act. So there were many prescriptions that, okay, if you are having high noise, so you have to limit the noise to this level. If you are working in high heat area, then you have to limit your work. Like Mr. Ishkesh has told that there is shift. I mean, you can break the work in if you're working in heat, or you have to be like given the welfare facilities like drinking water and all those things, which were everything is contained in the Factories Act. Then came ESI Act 1948. Okay, so to take care of their illnesses or their family members for the workers, so we came up with the ESI Act. But these are the acts which are for the formal workers who are engaged in manufacturing units or who are registered units and who are registered under these particular acts. So only those workers are benefited from these legislations. So Mines Act came in 1952. Again, it has some part of occupational health in that. Dock Workers Safety, Health and Welfare Act in 1986 came, and then to have some of the part in that. And we all know about Bhopal gas, from where much of the like our Environmental Act came, Protection Act came in 1986. So this is how we have developed our systems, but at the ground level, still we have a long way to go because still we have kind of if we see the figures, we will know that how we are presenting total scenario. Overall, we know that unsafe work conditions are rampant around the globe. 40 to 50% of the world population at work-related risk, right? And occupational injuries are like 120 million injuries with 0.2 million fatalities worldwide per year. Occupational diseases 11 million with 0.7 million deaths worldwide per year. So we should just compare these two things. Injuries are very easy to understand. Okay, so some accident happens, we know we can count the number of people who have been affected by those injuries or accidents, and that is much represented by I mean all over the world, because that is very quickly reported, recorded, and they are like the database is there. But for occupational diseases, we represent too low. And if we want to compare, occupational injuries are like if you get cuts or bruises, or maybe like you have amputation of your fingers, hands, legs, or maybe accidental deaths or other things where you have to be admitted for a particular time of your like, and you are away from work, so that is occupational injury. But for occupational diseases, we have no data. Look at those two figures. Mostly India and other developing countries are not presenting in these two figures because in last so many years, it was like cumulative data of Ministry of Labor for 5 years, and we have reported only 726 occupational diseases in whole of India. Wherever, if I in the next few slides, I will share you with what we are like And these occupational diseases are those diseases which are notifiable under Factories Act. Under Schedule 3, 29 of total of them are occupational diseases, and which have to be, if you diagnose them, you have to be reported them. For example, silicosis is one of them. Estimate is that we have more than 30 lakh people suffering from silicosis in India, and probably, till a few years back, there were no reported case of silicosis in India. We were diagnosing them as tuberculosis, but after a few of the efforts, and then now, like state of Rajasthan, which is have come up with the pneumoconiosis board, the diagnosis has been made much easier, and they have been workers are being compensated. But before that, we were not having any reportable data to which we can say that this is occupational diseases. So we'll understand once we go through further through the presentation that how to differentiate between these two injuries and diseases part. And 3% of the global burden of diseases is basically occupational diseases. So it is a huge burden, uh, and it can be the range of 2 to 14% of gross national product loss to any country because of these injuries or accidents and diseases. US alone loses $60 billion annually to these occupational diseases. 10% of the admissions in general medicine, as I say that we diagnose it at tuberculosis for silicosis. So in our country, it is like 10%. If we compare this, maybe this figure, maybe a more figure. But in general medicine, if we have 100 people admitted, so out of those 100 people, 10 people might be having occupational disease. Access to occupational health services is very low throughout the world. It is 5 to 10% in developing countries and 20 to 50% in developed countries. That too to the formal sector in developing countries, not to, we think of agriculture workers, which is more than 60-70% in our population. So they are not having any access to the occupational health services. Say, for example, they are working in very high heat in sunshine during June, July, right? And then they are exposed to pesticides, they are exposed to like other chemicals which they are using. They have poor working postures which are affecting their joints and all those things. So many things, but they can't access any occupational health services. They have no guidance how to prevent these occupational exposures. So that is a huge lacuna where we are right now. Occupational diseases are on the rise worldwide because of new technologies, new chemicals, new like all those upcoming things. Work-related stress is on the rise. Again, this is impacting much of us. Right now, if we see after COVID, work from home has given a lot many people a new arena of where they are working, and then it is clubbing their stresses because if we go through the studies or even online work, we have come up with the term like Zoom fatigue, right? So people who are working on Zoom or having meetings on Zoom, they are reporting Zoom fatigue kind of thing. So again, new work patterns, IT industry globalizations are emerging. So all those things we have to count into occupational diseases once we talk about this. Just look at this chart where if we think that this is diabetes, basically, if this, look at this cursor, if I am moving on that line, high fasting plasma glucose. So this is the burden of diabetes all over the world. If we say this is although 2010 figures, look at this occupational risks, right? So if we think that occupational this diabetes is here and occupational risks are here, they are no less. But we don't know about them. We know most of propagation about diabetes, high blood pressure, cancers is around us, but Do we hear about occupational risks, or I mean, through government or other agencies? Probably not. So this is the concern, which is like due emphasis is still not given to this very high risk, which is almost making 3% of the overall burden of diseases globally. So we now, this was a micro picture of where we are right now. If we come to our workplace, then let's start with understanding the occupational hazards. Maybe you are knowing, but just to revamp quickly, we are exposed to physical hazards like heat, cold, humidity, vibration, noise, radiation, illumination. Chemicals are dust, metals, gases. Biological hazards are viruses, bacteria, protozoas. Ergonomics is basically how the job is being fed to the human beings. So, for example, we can understand these first three of them. Uh, for example, in last presentation also, like heat, it is impacting much of the population, because once the temperature is rising even at 1 degree, then the human capacity as physiology, your heart rate will increase, your perspiration, the sweating will increase, and you need more of muscle fatigue, and there will be more of muscle fatigue. You need more of rest. So if you are looking for a 8 hour shift for a worker, so for example, if I say it is, if we maintain a temperature of 28 degree in the environment, then he may be able to work for 8 hours. But if the temperature is increased to 30 degree, he may, I mean, physiologically, he have to work half of his full capacity. Like then he has to work for 8 hours, and if it is like 32 degree centigrade, then he has to work for 2 hours only. Only then his body will be able to do the productive job. Otherwise, it will be much of fatigue, and the productivity will fall very quickly. So that is how even simple 2 degree variation can affect your outputs as a human being. And then definitely, if your physiology is not complying, like physiology means your internal working system, which is sensitive to heat. So then it will start deteriorating very quickly, and then maybe other things. For example, if you are dehydrated much of your throughout your shift, or maybe your working time, then could be possibly this you may land up some with kidney disease kind of thing. So that is how things are happening. Then vibration, if we think of oil and sector, oil and gas sector. So I think if you go to any offshore, huge machineries which make very high noise and vibrations, so they can impact, vibrations can impact your sensory systems. Like if you are working with a drill machine continuously for many years, so you will have numbness of your starting from your hands, and then the numbness may go to upper areas, and there are other impacts with your cardiovascular systems and other things. So chemicals, we know gases, metals, heavy metals like mercury, like lead, cadmium. These are all present in your oil and gas sectors. Dust, silica, and asbestos is there, because once you start like digging any area, so silica is in the earth crust, so the workers are exposed to those areas. Uh, Biological, basically, as a doctor, we are all exposed to viruses. We know about like COVID. So as a professional, if I am seeing few of the patients with COVID, and I get this disease, so that is occupational disease for me. We know about hepatitis B, HIV, which usually surgeons get, because once they are operating to a HIV positive or hepatitis B positive patient, if they get the needle pricks, they may land up with the disease, right? And then the ergonomics is simply basically if two people of different heights are working on the same workstation, they may not work well, because if 5 feet height is given the same table as 6 feet height, so 5 feet height may have to like make him up to work on the same table, and the 6 feet height may have to like bend to do the work. So are we doing the fitting on the it's basically not the human being has to fit to the machine, but machine has to fit to the human being, so that like it should be adjustable. So we know about our in IT sector, we know about the adjustable chairs, so we can like lower it or make it up so that according to our height we can fit it. Simple example is if I take your car, the first thing I will adjust is mirror and the chair so that I can comfortably drive it. So that is ergonomics. Psychosocial is basically it's interpersonal relationships. It's relationship with your supervisor, your junior, your colleague, and those things, and how much stress is over there in your workplace, and all those things are there. And accidentals are basically we'll learn about falls, slips and falls, and in oil and gas sector, it is like once you are digging or excavation is there, so accidents can happen at those places. Machine accidents, fire accidents, electrical accidents can happen. So all those things are there. So these are occupational hazards in any of the industry. We will elaborate in the like scenario for this. So we know about hazards are there, and then the health effects are there. It can be acute or chronic. I'll just browse through these few slides, photographs, which will make it easy to understand. Some diseases, occupational diseases, can happen in 6 months, and some may take around 40 years to develop, like noise-induced hearing loss. So if you are exposed to decibels of 90 decibels or more than that throughout your 8 hours shift, and then you measure your hearing capacity, you may lose your capacity in the um, maybe 30-40 years, right? So time to exposure, how much time you have been exposed, what are the preventive practices you are adopting, do you have comorbidities, high blood pressure, high sugars, so all those things, genetics can affect, other environmental factors can affect the outcome of that exposure. And route of exposure is basically through your skin, through your inhalation, and through your ingestion. So three routes are there basically. So much of them can if we see about the chemicals or gases, they will enter the human body through the respiratory system. But many of the chemicals, if they fall on the skin or you are touching them, so they can enter your body through the skin. And it could be ingestion also. So if you are not washing your hands before you take your food, and you have been working with some hazardous chemicals or maybe dust or anything, so you ingest, and then it can be harmful to your body. So, out of all these, which we were talking about, all the diseases, there are many diseases which are affected by your working conditions. Say, for example, if already you are having high blood pressure, and in your working condition, you are working at in a confined space, or you are working in such areas where your blood pressure become high. So those conditions which already existing in your you have, so that can be affected by the your working conditions. And there are diseases caused by the working conditions. Very few are identified and very few are prevented. So practice basically we don't know about. So we are just dealing with very small thing in overall disease scenario. So this is how the diseases are like if we take a time graph and recognition. So accidents are recognized easy to see in like minutes or hours, right? But the hearing loss may take decades, which I have already discussed. So say for example, like poisoning, it can be acute poisoning, it can be chronic poisoning. It can, the allergies can develop the contact allergic dermatitis, which is very common in oil and gas sector, because the petroleum products which if they are on your skin, so you can get dermatitis, right? So asthma could be because of like uh, sensitizing asthma, so you become allergic to something and then you develop asthma. Skin diseases can take long. uh, Cancers, infertility can take longer duration of time to present. So we have to have a chronological like data of all the workers, which we will discuss how we do the medical examination. So this is how things are overall. So if you see, this is the silicosis patient, right? So working in few years in a stone crushing unit can affect your lungs. This is how the ergonomic works. Like you are doing the same job for hours together, and then this is not just ergonomics. You are exposed to these chemicals coming out of this drum also, and this is again poor ergonomics in like small handloom weaving area, right? And this is like a person with nasal septum perforation. So this nasal bone has been eroded due to work in chrome electroplating. So there are many people who, although this is notifiable disease, but we have no case, I think, reported till now of chrome ulcers, nasal perforations. This is again accidental injury to eye with alkali injury, and then it was stricture formation. Required 6 operations to like avert the lid. Otherwise, it was sticking to your eyeball, right? And this is lead toxicity where your nerves are damaged, and this is 29-year-old patient who has this wrist drop. The nerve is dead, and this wrist he can't like it is in flex mode. He can't extend it. Like he can't do this section, so it will remain like this only because this is permanent damage, and we can't like do anything with this kind of thing. Look at this scenario. We all know, I'm just showing because this is where we think occupational health is, and this is not like sector specific or something like that. We observe these things every day, right? So if this work is going around us, we don't even know how many I mean, hazards he has been exposed to, all the chemicals, organic matter, virus, bacteria. If it is like clubbing industrial waste or other things, rodents, cockroaches, all those things which you can imagine can be in this manhole, and people are working their body in this kind of scenario, right? If we are thinking about any protection, prevention, or control mechanisms, I think only this safety belt is there or safety rope is there, which is just to pull him out if he dies inside the manhole, right? This all scenario is from MSME units where like people are working with in this situations like how his back will do in coming years. And this is very young person without any protection with working on grinders. Much of the protection like face shield is not there, or and this is all chemical, mechanical, moving wheel without any guards. All those things are there. Molten metal 1200 or degree temperature without any safety shoe. They are in their this bathroom slippers without any gloves, without any face protection. All those things we see this day out, day in. Again, silicosis. So many people are suffering from this, which I estimate by ICMR is about 30 lakh people. So this is how the lung is. This is the normal lung black part, but this is how the affected lung is. So this is all around us. Only thing is the diagnosis is not there. We are not reporting it. We are not like preventing it basically, right? So another sectors like tea gardens. Then these children are working with very dangerous chemical dyes to dye the thread, right? And this is the electronic waste units near Delhi. This is again like a pit handloom where they work from 5 a.m. morning till 12 in the night. So a lot of exposures are there, foundry work, henna work, like garment work. So every place we have all those occupational hazards and health outcomes. So again, this is the rescue work during the disasters. We know about the oil and gas sector, if explosions, fires, oil spills happens in the sea. So all those places we have to have its environmental impact and as well as human health impact. So again, the war scenario and these soldiers are having basically occupational injuries, all those things. So basically, occupational diseases are only preventable. We can prevent them. Once they happen, they are like non-reversible and they will progress. Even if you are exposed to one asbestos fiber and if it goes to your lungs, it can present with asbestosis or lung cancer in due course of time. So we just can prevent those exposures, right? So I'll just quickly, because much of has been dealt, I'll quickly go through what are the occupational hazards in oil and gas sector, which is just quickly I'll go through. So if we see about the accidental hazards, so much of the motor vehicle accidents can happen. Contact injuries where people are crushed by tools, machineries, or other objects. So heavy machinery, if there is anything which, or maybe the two moving objects and people are standing there and they are struck by like this uh, earth mover. So usually accidents can happen with the movement of these vehicles, right? Fire and explosions are known to oil and gas industry, we know, and slip, trips, and falls because of like if you go to refinery and if it is like slippery surfaces or uneven surfaces, then they have to work at heights like this kind of height person is going. So could be possibly there could be falls and all those things. And confined space, if the people are working, then there is less of ventilation. And then if, for example, I have seen practically that if you are having, say, for example, low hemoglobin, your hemoglobin levels are say 7, 8, 9, 10, and you are working in a confined space, you're definitely going to collapse over there. So there comes the role of preventive health checkups, where we know that okay, this person is having already something which is not good to go inside the confined space, right? And then this is the accidental areas in oil and gas sector. And this is the overall scenario in like occupational diseases, where which throughout the process, if we start from the survey to exploration and drilling to the final sales and distribution, the whole oil and gas sector, if we divide like refining, pipelines, and everything. So there are all those things, their exposures can, the agents can be present in those areas. So, for example, hydrocarbons are known for, many of them are like benzene is known for leukemia, cancer, right? So that is a byproduct of petroleum refinery. There are phenol and other things, so many things, naphtha, and I even don't remember those things, those, and there are their health effects also, right? So there are heavy metals during the exploration. So mercury is one, H2S is gas is there. So all these things are there. Silica, asbestos, noise, vibrations, mechanical ergonomic shift works, right? Offshore works, people have like, if they have to work in offshores, they come with like a scurvy, like vitamin C deficiency. It used to be there, but now also sometimes we see people with vitamin C deficiency because of their once they are in shore work, offshore work, right? And some may have like Meniere's disease or um, seasickness kind of thing. So these are basically the agents which are present in those scenarios, and this is the uh, this is how the possible health effects can occur: noise-induced hearing loss, sleep deficit, heat stroke, cancers, right? Dermal and eye issues, GI, your gastrointestinal disorders, pulmonary diseases, so and your cumulative trauma disorders, basically back pains, chest pains, all those things. So this is throughout the spectrum of your whole area, and we have to do the risk assessment. We have to know the occupational hazard at particular scenario or process, and then we have to have some preventive measures or risk control mechanisms. Like Mr. Rishikesh has told us much of the about this engineering controls, where even small like painting with the reflective paints can prevent the heat or the temperature, maintaining the temperature. So we have to depend upon these engineering controls rather than much of on PPEs. So this is how the hierarchy of control works, right? So increasing effectiveness is basically we have to make that process or the area safer, than we depend upon the people to wear their own PPEs, right? So that is how things are there. So for chemical safety, we have to have MSDS, we have to comply with the TLVs. For machine safety, we have to have machine guarding, preventive maintenance, all those sorts which we know everybody is doing. And that's how we have to prevent this overall scenario. We have to do the medical surveillance of these people who are working in particular areas. So, for example, if somebody is working with noise and noise, so we have to have his audiometry done. If he is working with some inhalable chemicals or gases, or working with dust exposure, so we have to have his pulmonary function test done. So these are the mandatory examinations, which may be a pre-placement and medical examination, or periodic medical examination. Like it could be general, but it could be specific according to the exposure, specific exposure. Like I told you, if it is audiometry or pulmonary function test, or it could be eye test, or it could be whatever the person is exposed to. So what organ system could be affected due to that exposure? We have to have some specific examination of that organ system, right? So return to work examination, post injury and post illness, these are again things which are to be looked for. And there are some wellness programs also, but the guidelines are provided by the Oil Industry Safety Directorate, OISD, which is the standard 166 on guidelines for occupational health monitoring and in oil and gas industry, where they have prescribed like monitoring is to be done, how frequently to be done, what are the standards to employ somebody, like if a male has to be given a job, so he has to fit into those criterias, only then he is employable in that particular area. So all those guidelines are there. I think this document is for oil industry. But apart from that, whatever is feasible, like it could be a voluntary thing apart from these guidelines, because these are guidelines. Probably these are not mandatory, but above that, if you participate in this kind of some of the programs like nutrition and education, smoking cessation programs, or stress reduction programs in your work areas, then things could be, apart from like from the whatever we have discussed. In addition to that, if we do this kind of activity in our own areas, it could be complete well-being of the employees for us, right? So thank you so much for your kind attention. Wish you a very happy, healthy, and productive life. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mittal. Thanks a lot. It was a very nice presentation on occupational health. And we learned a lot, from your presentations about, what is an occupational health, and that it's not merely the absence of disease, but as you mentioned, that is a state of and social well-being. Thank you so much, sir. If there are questions in the chat box, I would request
Sure.
if you can may kindly answer them. So now we'll not keep the next presenter in waiting. We have Dr. Jaya Kumar, Assistant Professor and Coordinator PSW. He's a senior faculty at NIMHANS with more than 18 years of experience in psychosocial care. He has worked in all major disasters, and he's also the former senior consultant with National Disaster Management Authority on psychosocial care and had coordinated the psychosocial care guidelines. So now he is currently part of Dr. Shekhar's team for 2 decades. So may I request Dr. Jaya to kindly give his lecture and talk and presentation. Dr. Jaya, you are on mute. Your mic is muted.
Thank you, Mainak, for the introduction, and good evening to all the participants. I'm connecting you from Chennai. In fact, I came from taking another program to join here. So I'll be half an hour. I'll be talking to you on this important aspect of psychosocial care. I don't know how I will share this. This one, yeah. So somebody, the earliest esteemed speaker was talking about psychosocial care issues in industrial disasters. Industrial disasters are emergencies, which is essentially we call it as a CBR and emergencies or disasters. We have had enough of disasters, its dynamics, its impact on various aspects, including your chemical and technological to the medical and physical. One of the important aspect here is that the psychological care, which is one of the invisible component which is usually left out in most of the disasters cutting across the countries, and India being most vulnerable to disasters other than industries, because it doesn't only happen on the on-site, it also actually makes large amount of relevance on the off-site also, on-site and off-site also. So we have had a number of incidents. So we usually, the disaster professionals, call it India is a theater of disasters, both for the due to the hazard, natural hazard, or human error or human intention is also involved. So we have had enough of all these aspects. But coming to the understanding on the psychosocial care front, any disasters, emergencies, be it on an industrial front or anywhere, which is a disruption essentially occurs, which is not only on the structural, which is not only on the lives, but it is also on psychosocial, which greatly exceeds the coping capacities of the people or the humans involved. And usually this is exacerbated by two important aspects in an industrial setting, which may be mostly due to human error or maybe due to human intention. So this is the two aspects which we call it. That's what the WHO also talks about it. So the earlier speaker was talking about various factors of disasters in industrial setting. He also mentioned actually one of the factors is psychosocial. What is the psychological impact? How it actually has an impact on the industries, both on the workers, or the management, or even the surrounding areas. There are very many factors which affects on the psychological front. First is this magnitude and occurrence and type of the disaster or emergency. Usually, we recently we saw the Visakhapatnam industrial accidents, or even in the Mumbai, or the larger scale in the event of a Bhopal or other sort of things. So the response usually comes from us, the humans, is adaptive and maladaptive response, which is essentially governed by few aspects. That is the exposure, the age of the person, the gender, and also the preparedness aspects, and the past experiences, and their health status, and also the leadership, so on. So these are all some of the factors which provides them whether they have the adequate capacity to overcome that event, or they are ill-equipped or maladaptive to this unforeseen event. So this is what the response to any industrial disasters. So we have had various sort of industrial disasters. I will not go into the details of it, but I will go into the some of the aspects which covers is that four important aspects an industrial management or the emergency team need to understand how this emergencies or disasters affect on psychological front. First is that the early speaker was talking about physical impact. The physical impact, anything maybe from the death or injuries or to rashes or to various other physical ailments, and which will also exacerbate other aspect. Along with that, because of this physical impact, there will be a large amount of psychological reactions. Essentially, these are all, I won't say that actually it's a symptom, it's all reactions. I would say that anxiety, fear, shock, despair, uncertainty, insecurity, what will happen to me? Mostly this happens in industrial setting because you may not be knowing how to contain it, or you may not be knowing whether it is affecting. So the component, five touch component, the feel component, the smell component may not be there in many of the industrial accidents. So there will be a large number of panic will be there. That's what we saw in many of the industrial disasters. So the psychological impact will be that one. Along with that, what will happen to me if something happened to, what will happen to my family if something happened to me? So along with that, the loss of limb, loss of mm, other body parts or injury, the ailment part also actually exacerbate into an economic impact, because large amount of disruption happened in the industries, employment gone or reduced employment, the reduced ability to function. So these are all going into an economic impact. Added to that, the social impact, the stigma of being worked in the company, a stigma of being part of the disaster or affected by disaster, or he is jobless, or he is not that before, he is burnt, or he is disfigured. So all these things actually combined, I would say here, the four impact domains which I am talking: physical, psychological, economic, social impact. Each one is actually interrelated, I would say. That is why the psychological impact will be much more in these sort of industrial disasters. Usually, if it is not on a large scale, it affects the individual, obviously with the family, and if it is a larger scale, it also actually escalates into sort of a community impact. So if there is a change in one domain of physical impact, definitely it will have an impact on the psychological domain. If there is any impact on the economic impact of the factory worker or an industry or something, definitely it will go into psychological impact. So my point here is that psychological impact is a cross-fitting area, whether it is an industrial loss, whether it is an industrial accident, or it is accident loss due to an accident, loss of job due to an accident. Everything will have some portion of psychological impact on it. So added to that, there will be a lack of access to healthcare and disability and death, denied or adequate compensations, or employable issues, and inaccessible to the services post disaster or something, and added to the stigma and discrimination. All these things exacerbate the psychological impact of the in any industrial disasters. This is what we have seen. I would like to quote here, even after 30 years of 1984 Bhopal disaster, the ICMR study says that even today, 60 to 80 percentage of these survivors and their relatives do suffer from some form of mental health issues added along with the health issues. So this is was in any disasters. So the long term, what are all the issues? Host of psychosocial issues that includes anxiety. Long term, it actually may escalate into a depression, and may go into ill-being. So here we are talking about the ill-being of the person from a well-being due to this disaster experience, the traumatic loss, also actually puts this people, individual or the family, into a tight situation spot, like increased addiction issues, or some of the indicators, major psychological indicators in an industrial setting is that reduced productivity, attrition rate is increases, and all behavioral change. the aggressive behavior among the factory people because of the frustration and anger. Recently, I saw back what happened. We are all undergoing COVID 19, which is a biological emergency, and you saw an industry was ransacked by the employees. Few people were killed. This is all how this, whatever the management mistake or whatever the situation, whatever it is, at the end of the day, the anger and frustration were taken out like that. So it is also got into goes into out of hand. So some of the psychological earlier indicators, if not taken care, may escalate into some sort of a larger emergencies and all those things in the later part of the stage. Added to that, those who are disabled due to these emergencies and their families do undergo large amount of stress, laterally escalating into mental health illness and disability as well. Here, the disability is that is not only the physical disability, it is also the mental and emotional disability. So the reactions which we saw here in most of the industrial disasters are greatly impact. Psychosocial impact is always greater than the physical and medical impact, can affect all spheres of life and will have a long range ripple effect on the individual, family, and the community. So we need to understand some of the reactions like guilt, fear, shock, vigilance, which are all very common sort of reactions post disaster. And these disaster reactions are not an abnormal sort of reactions. These are all normal reactions to an abnormal situation like any disasters or any emergency. So the effect will be immediate reactions and delayed reactions, physical, that is cognitive, emotional, and behavioral, which I was talking about. The earlier speaker spoke about all the physical ailment or reactions. Cognitively, there will be poor concentration, worry, poor memory, confusion, poor conceptualization, and even prioritization. A number of industry workers or settings where they encounter these sort of any incidents do undergo intrusive memories of those events, coming preoccupation with that sort of an events, later on worrying about their well-being, what will happen to that, and added to that the anxiety fear component which I told. Survivor guilt also, there was a closed call, closed shave for somebody, so they may be regretting how I could not save my colleague, or my colleague died in front of me. That anger, irritability will be predominantly there, and all these things can go into later on the depressive symptoms, and postility also it increases, and fragility and feeling unstable. Added to that, there will be angry outbursts. People may withdraw from these sort of incidents and may take into alcohol. This is one aspect which most of the industries which encountered emergencies report is that many of the employees tend to increase their intake of alcohol and substance use. Also, the routines, the recreations which they used to do it, positive recreations. I would like to quote and unquote here. It's not recreation, doesn't mean that sitting with the two pegs or three pegs. Usually, when we are undergoing trauma, this actually increases the negative coping. So this may escalate into further mental health complications. So, what are the reactions in the short term and long term in any industrial disasters like giddiness, instability? Usually, the panic attacks. People will be reporting somatic complaints. People may be asking for post this company starts reviving. A number of people may be throwing up number of symptoms like somatic complaints, and that will may result in number of leaves taking, increased number of leaves taking, and irritability. And again, I told you that the increased substance is one major issues in industrial accidents or disasters or any emergencies. On a long term, on any industrial disasters, it's a grief, PTSD, that is not that much, so I will not go into that. The depression, what we start as a aloofness, not talking, not interested in work, helplessness, hopelessness, may escalate into some sort of a diagnosable sort of a depression in later stage. So we as a care providers, we need to be aware of these reactions. What is that actually that they may impact? And this is just not about the employee or employee's productivity. It also affects at the end of the day the individual, the family, and the community. So these industrial emergencies or accidents will lead from well-being to ill-being. So that is the occupational paradigm. We need to look into it because many of the industrial accidents are due to chemicals. In chemical emergencies, the worried well, people who will be fine, but who may be throwing up pseudo symptoms like fear, anxiety, and other physical ailments will be outnumbering the original, I mean, the real sort of symptomatic people. So it's also at times very difficult to care them also. Many times it may overwhelm the system, the management, or the care provider. So we need to provide psychosocial care, first aid, psychological first aid, and psychosocial care as part of the industrial safety and industrial disaster management plan. I told you, psychosocial care is a cross-cutting area, disasters, cutting across population, cutting across sectors. So we need to provide a sort of a basic sort of a psychological care. I would quote here is that there are a number of techniques are involved, like physical first aid. We also have psychological first aid, like providing sort of an immediate sort of needs, training them, training the care providers to listen to these survivors about to hear about their experiences, the traumatic events, apprehensions, uncertainties, and accepting their feelings, accepting their fears, their apprehensions, even the uncertainties with a much more empathy can bring them their anxiety level down. So these are all some of the three, four things on the psychological first front they can do it. There are a number of techniques are there. I think this is just a sort of an bird's eye orientation view for them on this important aspect of psychological care. Added to that, these care providers, whether it is the management or the emergency responders or the emergency medical responders, for them, the industrial accident is not a normal work. The suddenness and enormity and demanding, it will be a very demanding, multiple challenges will be there. And dealing with the witness to the death and dealing with the loss and painful experience of self and others will be not an easy job. Added to that, their role is not going to be a time bound one. They cannot go back home 1 or 2 days, 3 days, 4 days. You must have seen in many of the industrial disasters where some of these first responders will keep working. So they are also more susceptible to fear and anxiety. And added to that, there will be an isolation component will be there. People may not want to go and interact with them, touch them near. So what we are seeing in the COVID-19, and added to that, it will also be very stressful for them to handle these sort of industrial disasters because many of them may not be in a position to handle the technological or knowledge or skill they required, and they need to interact with various sort of experts, and that will be much more confusing and perplexing for them because number of people will come and say number of things. Added to that, the time will be very limited, and added to that, inability to get serious results during the disaster or post disasters, whether it is to contain the blaze or contain the spread or whatever it is. So that also actually going to give them large amount of stress. So they're not immune to stress. They're equally susceptible as the survivors, and this will take a toll on them. So we need to understand and recognize the stress. It was the earlier speakers were talking repeatedly about the stress. And for stress, there are no quick solutions. It need to be part and parcel of the industrial safety, industrial disaster management plan, preparedness, mitigation, and response phase. And your stress management should not be only a response sort of an intervention, but it should be a health promotion and preventive sort of an intervention, which should be not a time bound sort of an activity, but it should be a timeline activity. It should be continuous, sustainable. So these industrial teams or workers or the whole setup need to be oriented and made understand all the psychological reactions, how to recognize, how to understand, how to provide basic sort of a care. So the primary goal is to teach skills, be educational, and this will take some time. But the first and foremost is that in our country, in my own experience, many of the industries they have the very good teams which responds on the physical front or medical front, but lacks on the psychological front. So my request here to my friends here from the industries, so relook at your industrial disaster management plan, relook at your mitigation response rescue plan, incorporate the psychological aspect as one of the important component, which is very, very common and mandatory in Western world. So whether we are actually planning the debriefing session, debriefing it is not about the equipment or PPE or about the other technological aspects. Debriefing here is also about psychological aspect, and all of the team members discuss and talk about the feelings, apprehensions, fears, and anxiety, so that we can actually bring this issue of conflict problems and recognize the stress and give them a solvable, applicable solutions on easy basis. So with this, I will stop my this brief presentation. If you have any questions, you are most welcome to put it across. Thank you, Mainak.
Wonderful, presentation from your side on psychosocial support, and have really wonderfully mentioned that that what is the psychosocial impact on the surroundings, and the most important thing, which is that it is about understanding and recognizing the stress in making plans for disaster or industrial safety. That's the most important thing what you talked about, because there are a lot of cognitive stress which comes into, and what you mentioned about about the survival guilt, about the poor memories, loss of memories, and a lot of things which you have mentioned. So the most important thing is that you should have psychosocial and guidelines support towards industrial safety in this nation. Thank you so much. And if there are questions attached, if you can kindly answer in the chat box. May I request Rubab to kindly speak if he's there right now. Rubab, are you there? Okay, I think he's not there right now, and so this comes to the conclusion of the 3 days of the online training program with National Institute of Disaster Management, Ministry of Home Affairs, and it was a wonderful presentations for last 3 days, and and a lot of deliverables gone into that, and definitely we are all enriched with knowledge 3 days online training program which we had. And Fatima, you have something to say from National Institute of Disaster Management. I request Fatima to say something. Yeah, are you there, Fatima? I think there is a problem in the line. So the certificates and about this, online training programs, whoever has attended the 3 days, that would be provided to you at the email address which is there. And after all, it has been wonderful having all of you in this 3 days online training program. And thanks to Mr. Anil Gupta, from professor and head from National, Institute of Disaster Management, Executive Director, Mr. Manoj Kumar Bindal, for supporting this online training program. And Rubab, he's really, wonderful for his support. He's heading the Disaster Risk Management Division in Wiki. So thanks, Fatima. Thanks, all of you. Thanks, Varun. And Akhil Gupta is not at this point of time, but thanks all of you for, for it. It was great having you in this 3 days online training program. Thanks a lot. Thank you.